An abandoned factory, a frightened call at midnight, and a canine who refuses to ignore the scent of danger. Officer Mark Davis thought it was just another trespassing report until Rex led him to a wall that wasn't supposed to be there. Behind it, he found something no one was prepared for children hidden like broken toys. Want to know how loyalty uncovered the darkest secret of a town? Like this story, and don't forget to subscribe for more gripping tales of bravery. The call reached him 3 minutes after midnight, just when the town had settled into that shallow, uneasy quiet that only comes when the interstate hum fades and porch lights click off one by one. Mark Davis was on his way home, badge tucked into his breast pocket cruiser heater, breathing faint warmth at his knees. The dispatcher's voice threaded through the cabin, calm but taut. Unit 12, we've got a 911 from a delivery driver. Reports voices, laughter, and movement inside the old Carter Textile Building, 4th and Wren. Possible trespassers. Mark could have passed it on. His shift was technically over. But he had come up on streets like Wren where buildings remembered the hands that built them and the people who ran out of time. He reached back and touched the wire handle on the kennel gate. Rex rose, a whisper of fur and muscle ears, pricked eyes bright in the red dash glow. One more, buddy, Mark said, turning the cruiser into the dark. The Carter Building had been closed since the recession took the roof off folks' plans. The brick facade carried the slow grief of weather. Someone had hung a for-lease banner 12 years back. The wind had shredded it into ribbons. A chain-link fence shouldered the sidewalk. Mark parked under a busted street lamp that clicked as if remembering how to work. The delivery driver waited across the street, hands jammed into a hoodie, face pale with the retreating adrenaline of someone who'd heard something he couldn't quite explain. "I heard kids," the man said. No bravado, just the bare fact. Not like teens messing around. Little kids laughing. Then crying. I got out. Mark nodded, took the statement, sent him home. The air smelled like metal and old rain. He clipped Rex's working vest into place, checked the LED collar. Light felt the familiar weight of the flashlight in his palm. Inside the fence, a padlock hung at a lazy angle. It wasn't locked. Someone had clicked it shut without catching the hasp stagecraft for a passing glance. Mark swung it open and stepped through. Rex trotted at heel, taut and silent, the chain links whispering closed behind them. The front doors were boarded but not sealed. A plywood panel shifted under his push, the nails complaining softly. Their light slid into a lobby trapped in amber, a reception desk with a ring stain from a coffee mug long gone, a drooping potted plant petrified into dust, a corkboard with safety posters yellowed to tobacco. Mark listened. The building was full of its own small noises, settling wood-distant drafts, but nothing human at first. Then, from somewhere deeper, a faint scuff, the kind that comes from rubber soles finding grit. He felt the map of the place forming in his head, stairs to the left production floor, ahead offices above. "Search," he whispered, releasing Rex with a palm signal. Rex lifted his nose, drew in the stale air, and drifted forward. Not hurried, just precise. His tail settled into that level, thoughtful line Mark trusted. They moved past the reception glass into the main corridor. The beam passed over a row of time clock slots, the cards still there, names faded and soft. The hall smelled of rope and glue, and under that the sour trace of something recent, a sweet tang artificial that didn't belong to brick or oil. Fruit snacks, Mark thought. Kids' snacks. He slowed his breathing. Fear could make patterns out of dust, but the scent sharpened as they reached the double doors to the production floor. One door had been wedged ajar with a folded triangle of cardboard. The cardboard bore a boot print in gray street dust that was too small for a man. On the floor beyond, glitter specked like fallen stars. Not the kind adults use, the cheap kind that leaks from school art kits. Rex's body stiffened, weight shifting to his front paws. He looked back, gave a soft chuff permission to proceed. Mark nodded. They entered the production hall, and the dark lifted into columns of moon through the broken skylights. Rows of sewing tables sat like pews. A busted fan hung crooked in the rafters. He swept the beam along the floor. There, against a support post, a small paper cup lay on its side. Its lid askew, a ring of syrup at the base. Purple. Grape juice. Nearby, a crumpled wrapper with cartoon animals smiled up at nothing. Rex nosed the wrapper, then the floor, then pulled toward the far end of the hall where a loading door loomed black. Mark kept his steps soft, the old boards giving him away in small whispers. He scanned for signs of a camp blanket's bottle's ash. He found none. No cigarette butts. No beer cans. Whoever had been here hadn't come to hang out. They had passed through, or they had been moved. He knelt by a low workbench, running the light under it. A teddy bear eye glinted from the dust, no bear attached. He pocketed it with a care that surprised him. When he straightened, Rex was already at the loading door, head turned to the lower right corner, where the weather strip had peeled. The dog inhaled, then lifted a paw, and set it down again, a practiced sign. Fresh scent. Mark studied the door. The exterior latch had a chain looped through it, padlocked, but from inside a simple slide bolt held it shut. He eased the bolt back, raised the door an inch, then another. A night breath came in cooler and carrying the faraway sound of trucks 3 streets over. He lowered it again. Whoever used this door had done it recently, but not this hour. He pivoted, trying to read the room for a narrative. That's when the beam landed on the shoe. Small pink, the kind with light-up heels that didn't light anymore. The sole scuffed thin at the toes from playgrounds. It sat half under a metal spool rack, as if someone had been pulled, and the shoe had disagreed. He touched it with the back of his knuckles. The rubber was not cold. He took a slow breath that felt like it scraped his ribs on the way out. "We treat this as a child in danger," he murmured to Rex to himself. The radio crackled softly at his shoulder. He kept his voice low as he called it in. Possible minors involved requesting additional units EMS to stage 2 blocks out lights off silent approach. He gave the building description, the entry point, the probable vectors north alley, south stair. The dispatcher said, "Copy," and he heard the pen on paper in her tone. He could almost see the map blooming on the board back at the station. While he waited, he didn't wait. He walked the perimeter of the production floor, all the while letting the dog do the truer work. Rex checked corners, noses of machines, the dark throat of the freight elevator shaft. At one pillar he stopped and pressed his muzzle against a scratch in the paint about kid shoulder high. Mark bent close. 4 lines, vertical parallel, shallow. Fingernails. The wall had been clawed recently enough that the paint curl still clung. He swallowed. He thought of his daughter at 9 racing him to the car with one shoelace trailing like a kite tail. She lived 2 states away with her mother and a better school district. He carried her in the way he stood in rooms like this, back straight hearing more than he saw, careful with the small things. In the corner office, a window looked out over the floor. The door was propped with a folded catalog. Inside, dust swirled in the beam like minnows. A desk sat under a wall calendar stuck on March from a decade ago. But the chair had been pulled back recently. On the desktop, a polite, ordinary thing, a folded napkin from a fast food place with the name of a burger no adult ordered twice. The grease mark was still tender, not yet stiff. Next to it, the other half of the grape juice cup lid lay face down. He noted the details, photographed with his phone, logged them softly into the radio so as not to turn this room into a thriller for someone listening on a scanner. He left the napkin where it was, but he traced with the light the arc of a small smear leading from desk to door. Not blood, not oil. Sticky, clear juice. And then faintly from deeper in the building down the hall where the cutting rooms waited, the tiniest click. Not men moving furniture. Something lighter. He froze and shot a look at Rex. The dog's ears shifted toward the sound like satellite dishes catching signal. He pointed 2 fingers, sent him to hold. Rex lay down behind the doorframe, steady eyes on Mark. He eased down the hall, feeling each step before he gave it his weight. At the threshold to the cutting rooms, he stopped. A toy lay in the doorway, where no adult would leave it a plastic ring with beads trapped under a clear dome. He pressed it gently with his thumb. The beads rattled, and the sound that answered from within the room was not laughter and not crying, but the small catch of a breath being held, then released. "Hey," he said to the air, to the shape of a child that might be inside his next heartbeat. He kept his voice as soft as the time his girl had woken from a nightmare on his couch years before, when his living room had still smelled like cut grass and new paint. "My name is Mark. I'm with the police. I brought a good dog. He's quiet. He's kind. No one is in trouble." He kept the beam low, not into eyes, not into shadows where fear could grow. He reached into his pocket and took out the teddy eye, set it on the floor where the light could find it. "Did you drop something like this?" Silence held, but it did not feel empty. He recognized this space, the inch before trust. From the corridor behind him came the faint scrape of other units arriving, that careful choreography of boots that know not to announce themselves. He lifted his hand to signal them to slow. The building held steady like a chest balancing a breath. Rex padded up without a sound, leaned against his leg, and stared into the room with him, tail still, body relaxed in a way that telegraphed safety. Sometimes the bravest thing a dog did was to be still. The beads in the ring toy settled. Somewhere a truck downshifted on Wren. The town, indifferent and tender in equal measure, went on breathing. Mark moved his light a fraction, showing floor, a path, an exit that was not a trap. He felt the moment settle a beginning, choosing to be a beginning. He spoke again, the promise living in his throat before it made it to the air. "We're here to get you home." Mark stood perfectly still in the half-lit cutting room, his hand hovering above the small toy on the floor, while Rex remained steady at his side. The faint breath he had heard moments before had not returned, but the silence in the building was no longer the silence of abandonment. It was layered, purposeful, as if the walls themselves were listening. He shifted his beam slowly across the room, tracing shadows and then upward where the plaster met a ceiling that sagged from time. At first he thought the glint was a trick of glass, but then the angle sharpened, revealing a tiny black dome tucked into the corner, the kind of device a convenience store would mount to deter theft. Except this one was far too new for a building that had been dead for 20 years. The lens was clean unscratched, and the tiny diode at its base flickered the way only live circuits do. His stomach tightened. Someone had wired surveillance here, recent and deliberate. He raised the flashlight higher and found another camera angled toward the production floor, half hidden behind a beam. He followed the path down and noticed wires running neatly along the frame painted over in a dull gray, leading to a conduit that disappeared into the wall. Whoever installed it had taken care to disguise the work, but not for casual teenagers. This was professional, and it meant whoever he was dealing with knew how to watch. Rex's ears flicked at the same moment, and the dog moved with intention, leaving the doorway and padding across the floor with his nose close to the dust. Mark followed with cautious steps, keeping his weight balanced to avoid the groan of old boards. The dog slowed near the far end of the room, his body language shifting into the kind of alert Mark trusted most, not frantic but steady, his nose pulling him closer to the long brick wall that separated the cutting room from what had once been storage. Mark examined the wall with his light. At first glance, it looked like any other stretch of industrial brick, but as he moved closer, the pattern betrayed itself. The mortar lines were lighter, cleaner, lacking the dark years of grime baked into the rest of the building. Several bricks were slightly misaligned edges too sharp compared to the rounded wear everywhere else. It was a patch job recent, and someone had not expected a man with a good dog to study it this closely. He crouched, placed his palm on the surface, and felt a faint draft slipping between seams. Not strong, but enough to prove that air was moving behind it. Rex pressed his body closer, sniffing intensely, then sitting abruptly, eyes fixed on that wall with the patience of stone. Mark knew the signal. His partner had locked on to something, and it was more than dust. He pulled his radio, keeping his voice just above a whisper, reporting the discovery of surveillance equipment and a concealed section of wall possibly leading to an interior void. The dispatcher acknowledged and marked the note, promising additional officers were staging nearby, but Mark did not relax. Whoever had wired those cameras was likely watching the feed now, and the fact that he and Rex had not yet been challenged meant someone wanted to observe them longer. He traced the conduit back toward the brick where the wires vanished into a drilled opening. He leaned close, listening, and caught the faint hum of current. Power was still flowing, which meant there was a source not dependent on city utilities. He considered the logistics. To run cameras here, someone had either tapped into a grid illegally or carried portable generators inside. Both required regular maintenance. That implied presence, not abandonment. He imagined footsteps carrying fuel cans, hands tightening bolts, keys turning in hidden locks. The thought made the air around him heavier. He studied the floor along the wall, and sure enough, there were faint tracks in the dust. Not boot prints exactly, but scuff marks where something heavy had been dragged recently. The patterns overlapped and layered as if crates or large objects had been moved to disguise traffic. His light swept wider, catching a single thread stuck against the mortar, thin and pink, the kind that might belong to a child's sweatshirt. He bagged it carefully, knowing it was more than a detail. It was a heartbeat captured in fabric. Rex shifted, giving a low whine, not anxious but urgent. The dog pawed once at the base of the wall, then sat back down, eyes fixed and ears forward. Mark pressed gently against the bricks, feeling for give, and one block near the bottom had mortar that crumbled slightly under pressure. It was not structural. It was cosmetic. Someone had built this wall to hide something, not to support weight. He pulled his flashlight back and scanned the ceiling again, noting the camera's angle. It was positioned not just to cover the room, but to include this exact section of wall in its view. Whoever monitored the feed would see him crouching now, pressing at the surface, Rex alert at his side. He exhaled slowly and said under his breath, "They know we found it." The realization added urgency, but he tempered it with discipline. Rushing would serve the watchers, not him. He stood, gave Rex a hand signal to remain, and stepped back a few feet to take in the whole section. The wall spanned nearly 12 feet, but only a portion bore the newer brick. He mapped it visually, 7 bricks across 5 high, forming a rectangle just large enough to suggest a hatch or entryway sealed with cosmetic work. He imagined children herded through doors, shut, cries muffled by stone. He forced the image aside and focused on the evidence. He radioed again, advising that a probable concealed chamber had been located and would require tools to breach. The dispatcher asked if he could secure the scene until backup arrived. He said he could, but his eyes kept sliding to Rex, whose steady focus did not waver. The dog's instincts were often sharper than protocol. He could feel Rex telling him there is life beyond this wall, and waiting too long might cost it. Mark began a slow perimeter check, making sure no one could flank them while they waited. He moved into the adjacent hallway, sweeping his light across abandoned storage racks, overturned carts, and stacks of fabric rolls, stiff with age. But amid the decay, more details stood out. Footprints in dust, less than a day old. Candy wrappers tucked into a shelf, a plastic bottle half full of water without mold or dust. Signs of recent human occupation, deliberate and unhidden, once one knew how to look. He returned to the wall with his chest heavy, every sense tuned to the possibility of sound behind the bricks. He crouched again, pressing his ear close. At first, only silence. Then, faint, almost beneath hearing a rhythm, 2 taps, a pause, then another. Not mechanical, not random. A signal. His breath caught, and Rex gave a single soft whine in agreement. He pressed his hand against the brick as if it might carry reassurance through. He whispered, "Hold on," knowing the words might never reach. Mark remained crouched by the wall, the faint taps still echoing in his memory, while Rex sat rooted eyes locked on the newer brick with unwavering certainty. The silence that followed was almost heavier than the noise had been, as if whoever made the sound had withdrawn into breathless waiting. Mark knew backup would take time to arrive, and time here felt as fragile as glass. He considered his tools no sledgehammer, no crowbar, just the weight of his sidearm, the edge of his flashlight, and Rex's instincts. He walked the perimeter of the wall once more, brushing his hand over the seams, and then pressed hard against the base where the mortar had already loosened. With steady force he chipped at it, prying until a brick shifted slightly inward. Dust trickled out in a soft stream, and the hollow echo behind confirmed his suspicion this was not a solid partition, but a cover. He worked with deliberate patience, sliding one brick out, then another, creating an opening wide enough for his light to reach inside. What he saw first was darkness, but not the permanent kind. It was airspace, a void that did not belong to the architectural plans of an ordinary mill. Rex immediately moved closer, nose thrust toward the gap, body vibrating with restrained energy. His nostrils flared, and a low sound escaped him, not aggression, but recognition. Mark aimed the flashlight through the gap, revealing a narrow passage lined with concrete, the floor sloping downward in a steady descent. The edges of the tunnel bore marks of human work, not original to the building, but carved later smoother than the crumbling brick outside. A service tunnel, he thought, meant to carry wires or pipes repurposed now for something else entirely. He widened the gap carefully enough to slide through if needed, though not yet. He crouched and inhaled. The air smelled different here, cooler and damp, carrying traces that did not belong to stone alone. Beneath the mineral scent lay the undeniable hint of sweat, faint but fresh. He glanced at Rex, whose nose worked furiously before he sat back and gave a sharp, deliberate bark, the signal he reserved for human scent. Mark's chest tightened. This was no echo of the past. This was now. He lowered his voice, almost a whisper meant more for the unseen ears beyond the wall than for his radio. "If you can hear me, stay calm. We're going to get you out." The words hung in the stale air like a promise. He knew children often clung to the simplest reassurances when lost in fear, and even if they could not hear saying it, anchored him against the chill crawling up his spine. Mark checked his watch and calculated. Backup units would likely be assembling outside within minutes, but breaching this tunnel required knowledge of what lay beyond, and waiting too long could mean silence turning permanent. He debated calling the entry team to bring specialized gear, but his eyes fell on Rex again. The dog's body was taut, tail-stiff gaze fixed into the void. Rex had found something real, and Mark trusted that instinct more than any blueprint. He adjusted his gear belt, radioed in the new discovery, and gave precise coordinates. Then he knelt to inspect the tunnel entrance more closely. The concrete walls showed handprints smeared faintly with grime smaller than an adult's clustered near the base, as if children had braced themselves while moving through. He touched one impression lightly. The dust was disturbed recently, soft against his glove. His mind pictured small palms pressed against the surface, guiding their way in fear. Rex whined again, pawing at the ground, his whole frame urging forward. Mark placed a calming hand on the dog's back, then angled the flashlight deeper into the passage. About 15 feet ahead, the tunnel curved left, swallowing the light into shadow. He listened intently and caught the faintest rhythm, not tapping this time, but a shuffling irregular like feet sliding in hesitation. His pulse quickened, but his training held him steady. He pulled a marker from his pocket, drew a quick arrow on the brick outside the hole, and noted the time. If for any reason they had to retreat, he wanted clarity for the team following. He clipped a mini light to Rex's vest, checked the harness strap, and whispered, "Stay close." Then he squeezed through the opening, careful not to scrape his gear against the brick. The tunnel was narrower than it appeared, his shoulders brushing each side, but manageable. Rex slipped in behind, with practiced ease, his nails clicking softly against the concrete before settling into a steady rhythm. As they descended, the air grew colder, the dampness more pronounced, and the smell sharpened. It was not decay, but human presence layered on stone, the distinct warmth of breath that had lived here. Rex paused, once inhaled sharply, then surged forward, ears high. Mark lifted his light and caught sight of a small scrap on the floor, a corner of paper torn from a coloring book, the crayon lines still bright beneath the dust. He pocketed it quickly, a testament that children had passed here not long ago. The tunnel widened briefly into a small alcove where rusted metal shelves leaned against the wall. On one shelf sat a plastic bottle of water, half-full condensation clinging inside. The cap was loose. He touched it gently and found it still cool, a chilling confirmation that someone had been here hours, maybe minutes before. Rex circled the alcove, nose pressed to the floor, then froze with sudden intensity. He gave a single sharp bark, body rigid. Mark followed the gaze and found at the edge of the light another faint mark, scuff lines from shoes small running toward the curve. He felt the pull of urgency tighten inside his chest. He advanced slowly, senses straining, every sound magnified. The tunnel beyond curved again, deeper into the unknown, but the signs were undeniable. Children had been moved here, possibly still were, and the passage did not exist without purpose. Rex leaned forward, nose to ground, then looked back with eyes that seemed to speak what Mark already knew. This was no longer a question of if they were here. Mark steadied his grip on the flashlight, whispered a word of encouragement to Rex, and prepared to follow the curve into whatever waited beyond. Mark moved with careful precision as the tunnel curved left and dipped further into the ground, the narrow beam of his flashlight cutting through dust that shimmered like fine ash. Rex advanced slightly ahead, his harness brushing against the concrete walls, his head low as he drew in scent after scent, cataloging the invisible trail with the expertise only a trained K9 could bring. The officer's ears tuned to every faint echo, the scrape of his boots sounding too loud against the weight of the silence. Yet he pressed on because every step brought a stronger certainty that they were no longer searching for traces. They were on the verge of finding someone real. The passage narrowed again, forcing Mark to angle his shoulders, and just as the confinement began pressing into his ribs, Rex stopped abruptly. His entire body stiffened, ears pinned forward, and he gave a short bark, sharp and direct, the one reserved for imminent detection. Mark lifted his light to where the dog's nose pointed. At first he saw nothing but concrete pocked with moisture stains. But then he noticed an indentation in the wall, a shallow recess covered with a sheet of plywood screwed hastily into place. The edges bore scratches, frantic, shallow grooves like fingernails desperate for escape. Mark's pulse hammered against his throat as he crouched low, listening closely. He thought he heard the faint rustle of fabric behind the board, a tremor of movement too deliberate to belong to vermin or drafts. He set the flashlight between his knees, pulled a multi-tool from his belt, and began loosening the screws one by one, every twist echoing like a gunshot in the narrow passage. Rex stood guard, his body angled outward to watch both directions of the tunnel, a sentinel of muscle and intent. When the final screw dropped to the floor, Mark slid the board aside slowly, revealing a cavity no larger than a crawlspace. Inside, curled tightly with arms hugging her knees, was a little girl. Her eyes reflected the light like startled glass, and her breath came in shallow, rapid pulls. She looked no older than 7. Mark softened his tone, lowering his voice to the same calm register he used with frightened witnesses and his own daughter years ago when she had woken from storms in the night. "Hey there. It's okay. My name is Mark, and this is Rex. We're here to help." The child flinched, pressing back into the corner as if expecting punishment for being seen. Mark noticed the bruising shadows under her eyes, the dirt smeared on her cheeks, and the tremble in her hands. He placed his palms open on the floor, showing emptiness, no threat. Rex, sensing the fragile line between fear and trust, lowered himself onto his belly and crawled halfway into the recess, his tail wagging once in a slow, reassuring rhythm. The girl's gaze flicked to the dog, lingered, and something in her posture shifted the tension, easing just enough for Mark to continue. "What's your name?" he asked gently. Her lips parted dry and cracked, and the sound that emerged was barely more than air. "Emily." Mark repeated it softly, anchoring the name in the space as though speaking it made her more real, more present. "Emily, you're safe now. We're going to take you out of here." Her eyes darted toward the tunnel, and she shook her head violently, whispering so faintly he had to lean closer to hear. "They said if we move, we disappear. We have to sit still." The words struck him like cold iron, their chilling simplicity betraying the kind of conditioning no child should ever know. He fought the instinct to promise everything was fine. Instead, he grounded his voice in steady truth. "You've been very brave sitting still, but now it's time to leave this place. Rex and I will protect you." She hesitated, torn between obedience to an unseen command and the fragile hope before her. Rex closed the distance, nudging his muzzle gently against her knee. Emily's small hand rose tentatively, trembling as she touched his fur, and the shift was instant. Her breathing steadied, her body uncoiled slightly, and she allowed Mark to slide his arms beneath her. She weighed almost nothing, light as a memory, but the responsibility settled heavier than stone. He cradled her carefully, adjusting his stance to keep balance in the tight tunnel. "We'll go slow," he promised. With Emily secure, Mark signaled Rex forward. The tunnel seemed darker now, the air denser, as though the building itself resisted their retreat. Each footstep echoed louder than before, a reminder that sound traveled easily in these underground spaces, and whoever had built this network could be listening. Emily pressed her face against his shoulder, whispering again, her words muffled but clear enough. "They said the box makes us quiet. If we don't stay quiet, we go back in." Mark's jaw tightened, rage and sorrow colliding in the space behind his calm expression. He could not let her see anger. She needed steadiness. "You're not going back in the box," he said firmly, the promise sealed by the steady rhythm of Rex's footsteps leading them forward. As they retraced toward the entrance, Mark scanned every alcove and shadow, half expecting movement, but the tunnel remained empty, silent except for the small hitch in Emily's breath. When they reached the wider alcove with the shelves, Mark paused long enough to adjust his radio, speaking softly. "Unit 12. I have one miner recovered, approximately 7 years old, alive and conscious. Name Emily. Preparing extraction from concealed tunnel beneath Carter Building. Immediate medical response required on surface." Static filled the line, but the dispatcher's reply broke through, faintly acknowledging. Relief brushed his shoulders, though it did not last. Emily stirred in his arms, whispering one final phrase before exhaustion claimed her voice. "They said more of us are still here." The weight of her words deepened the darkness around them. Mark tightened his grip, met Rex's eyes, and knew the mission was only beginning. Mark adjusted Emily's weight in his arms as he and Rex approached the tunnel entrance, the small girl's breathing shallow against his shoulder. Her whispered admission that more children were still hidden gnawed at his focus, but he kept his stride careful and steady, knowing panic would serve no one. He raised his radio again, repeating his request for immediate extraction and medics, but before the dispatcher could confirm, the world changed. Every light above and below flickered once, like a breath being stolen, then went out entirely. The tunnel plunged into absolute darkness, his flashlight beam the only defiance against a suffocating black that seemed alive. Emily clung tighter. A soft cry muffled in his jacket. Rex pressed closer to his leg, steady but alert, his ears flicking rapidly to absorb the shift. Mark knew the timing was no accident. Power cutoffs in derelict buildings often came from old circuits, but not synchronized like this. This was deliberate. Whoever had built the hidden chambers wanted to control more than bricks and locks, they wanted the environment itself. He lifted the flashlight higher, sweeping the space, and whispered to Emily, "You're okay. Stay with me." He guided Rex with a hand signal, directing the dog to scout a few feet ahead, the beam following his movement. He brought the radio to his lips again. "Unit 12 status update. Power loss building is dark tunnel compromised. Request confirmation." Static hissed back a long, hollow sound that offered no reply. He tried again, switching frequencies, but each channel gave the same emptiness, not even the clipped chatter of other units. The silence was too complete, and he realized with dawning clarity that the comms were not failing. They were being silenced. Someone was monitoring, blocking, and perhaps even listening. Emily trembled against him, whispering in the smallest voice, "They don't want you here." Mark steadied his breathing, refusing to let fear leak into his tone. "That's why we stay calm," he said. His training taught him that communication interference was as much psychological as tactical. Cutting officers off from their command center planted isolation like a seed. But he had Rex, and he had his own discipline. He would not yield that easily. He reached the original breach in the brick wall and carefully eased Emily through, shielding her head from the jagged edge. Once back in the cutting room, he paused, scanning for movement. The cameras still perched in the corners, their lenses faintly glowing in the flashlight's reflection. He realized those feeds might still be transmitting even if his radio could not. Whoever watched now knew exactly what he carried in his arms, a living child, proof of their crime exposed. Rex gave a low growl, soft but insistent, as he angled toward the far door. The dog sensed something Mark had not yet seen. He followed Rex's gaze and noticed shadows moving unnaturally near the edge of the broken skylight above. Not full forms, but shifting outlines that suggested observation. The thought confirmed what his instincts already screamed: they were not alone in this building anymore. He adjusted Emily again, tucking her closer, and weighed his options. Extraction through the front seemed compromised, especially if the enemy controlled power and sight lines. The safest path would be back through the tunnel system, deeper perhaps, but potentially toward other captives. Yet every step down risked a trap. He steadied himself with one truth: standing still was no longer an option. Mark crouched low, speaking directly to Rex in a calm murmur. "Search perimeter. Stay tight." The dog obeyed instantly, circling with precision, pausing briefly by the office door they had passed earlier. Mark noted the emphasis. Rex's nose never lied. He swept the office with his flashlight and saw something new. On the desk where the napkin had been, another object now rested, small and deliberate, a toy block brightly colored, the kind sold in dollar packs. It had not been there before. Someone had placed it while they were inside the tunnel. The message was unmistakable. Their movements were being followed step by step. Emily stirred her voice, quivering. "They leave things when they watch, to see if we notice." Mark pressed her closer, anger tightening into resolve. Whoever orchestrated this had woven intimidation into every detail, turning ordinary toys into signals of dominance. But he knew every signal also revealed presence, and presence meant vulnerability. He tucked the block into his pocket as evidence, whispering, "We noticed." The flashlight beam caught another irregularity on the wall opposite the cameras, a patch where plaster bulged slightly, concealing either a vent or another entry point. Rex sniffed it and barked once sharp, confirming a scent trail continued. The realization struck Mark: the network of tunnels and compartments stretched far beyond what they had seen. Whoever built this had designed layers of concealment with entrances scattered across the building. He raised the radio again, despite knowing the futility, speaking for the record if anyone managed to capture fragments. Communications compromised, suspect active surveillance, at least one child recovered, hostile presence likely on site. Continuing to secure subject. The static that followed seemed almost mocking in its emptiness. The weight of the blackout deepened. The hum of distant machinery that had whispered earlier was gone, leaving only the rhythm of their own breathing. He knew that meant the generators had been cut deliberately. Whoever held the switch wanted them in darkness, wanted them to feel hunted. Yet Mark refused to give them the satisfaction of panic. He adjusted his grip on his sidearm, his other arm securing Emily, and signaled Rex forward. The mission had shifted. They were no longer simply rescuers, but targets inside a maze designed by unseen hands. Still, he moved with purpose, determined that the child in his arms would not be returned to the shadows she had escaped. Mark steadied Emily against his shoulder, his flashlight the single thread of light in the heavy dark. He had learned to read Rex as one reads a compass, the tilt of the ears, the pull of the nose, the pause before a decision. Now the dog shifted from the office door, crossed the hall with determined precision, and pressed his muzzle against a side corridor that had almost vanished behind toppled shelves. Mark caught the signal, whispered reassurance to Emily, and pushed the shelves aside, metal legs screeching faintly across the floor. The corridor beyond was narrow, unlit, and stale, but Rex entered without hesitation. Mark followed his free hand on the wall, every sense stretched thin. The further they moved, the more he noticed patterns. Dust thinned in places, footprints smudged but present. Some were small, almost too small, like the marks of children guided along in single file. Emily stirred weakly, her head lifting from his shoulder, eyes adjusting to the flashlight beam. She whispered, "I know this way," then buried her face again, as if afraid the memory of the corridor itself could hurt her. Rex stopped abruptly at a heavy door scarred with rust. He sniffed the lower seam, then barked once, clipped and certain. Mark tried the handle, found it stiff, but not locked. He braced Emily closer, pushed the door open with his shoulder, and stepped into a room that froze him mid-breath. It stretched wider than expected, an old storage chamber. But instead of machinery or fabric, the space was lined with shelves and crates. Each shelf sagged under the weight of children's belongings. Backpacks in every color lined shoes in pairs, jackets folded too neatly. Dolls slumped with cracked faces, even sports gear with scuffed paint. The items were arranged in disturbing order, each tagged with a card bearing initials. Some tags were handwritten in neat ink, others in hurried scrawl, but all marked as if inventory in a warehouse. Mark's light swept slowly across the shelves. Names disguised as letters leapt at him. KMJRAH. Each one a whisper of a life separated from its owner. He set Emily gently on a nearby bench, kneeling to her level. Her eyes darted to the shelves, then closed quickly, as if she could will them away. "That's ours," she murmured. "They said we wouldn't need them anymore." Her voice cracked, and she wrapped her arms tight around her knees. Rex pressed his muzzle against her side, grounding her. Mark forced himself to walk the rows. He recognized the brands, the small details parents described when pleading with detectives. A backpack patched with stars, a jacket stitched with a soccer emblem, a stuffed rabbit missing one ear. Each matched reports he had read late into the night when cases crossed his desk from surrounding counties. They were not random lost items. They were evidence meticulously collected, catalogued, and hidden. He pulled his notebook, documenting quickly date, time, description, initials. He took photos with his phone, each click a small defiance against the silence. The weight of realization pressed against his ribs. This was no isolated crime, no single victim or coincidence. This was a system, a network pulling children from homes across districts and funneling them into shadows. He thought of the missing person boards at the precinct, faces laminated under fluorescent light, each one marked with years of unanswered questions. Now, standing in this room of belongings, he understood the thread that connected them. Rex moved ahead to a stack of crates in the far corner, his bark sharper this time. Mark joined him and pulled one open. Inside lay clothing, neatly folded, smaller sizes, stacked on top of larger ones, as though preparing for stages of growth. Beneath the clothes was a ledger, pages stiff but intact. He flipped it open and read lines of entries, dates, initials, notes marked with codes he did not recognize. Some entries ended with a single word, transferred. His pulse quickened as he turned pages. The pattern confirmed what his gut already screamed. Children were not simply taken, they were processed, recorded, and moved like shipments. He glanced back at Emily, who sat quietly with her arms around Rex's neck, her small body trembling but present. Her survival here was not chance. She had been counted, marked, and for reasons unknown left behind. He photographed the ledger every page, then slipped it into his jacket. Evidence of this magnitude could break a case open, but also painted a target on his back. Whoever managed this network had resources, reach, and precision. They would not allow exposure easily. Emily lifted her head, suddenly eyes wide. "They'll know you found this," she whispered. Mark crouched in front of her, steadying her gaze. "Then we make sure everyone else knows too," he said. His voice carried no bravado, just resolve. He gathered her close again, signaling Rex with a sharp gesture. The dog circled once more, ears twitching, then fixed on another exit at the far end of the room, a narrow door half hidden by crates. The scent trail continued stronger now, leading deeper. Mark hesitated, torn between extraction and pursuit. Protocol demanded retreat with the rescued child and evidence, but the urgency in Rex's stance, the unfinished truth in Emily's whisper pressed against every calculation. More children were out there, and every moment in hesitation was a moment lost. He steadied his breath, weighed the darkness beyond, and prepared to move. Mark carried Emily closer to the narrow exit. Rex had located the girl clutching his jacket with small trembling fingers. The air in the evidence room felt heavier now, as if the walls themselves knew too much, as if every backpack and pair of shoes on the shelves whispered that their owners were still waiting in places unseen. He adjusted his flashlight, scanning the crates stacked against the door, and carefully shifted them aside with his free hand. Rex stayed taut and silent, every muscle tuned to the unseen beyond the thin partition. When the door cleared, Mark turned the handle, slowly pushing it open just enough to test the way forward. The hinges groaned softly, the sound scraping against the silence. He led them through into a low concrete corridor, narrower than the last, the ceiling marked with pipes and vents. It smelled faintly of oil and rubber, fresher than the dust behind them. He recognized that scent, instantly vehicle storage nearby. His chest tightened because if this path led to a loading dock, it meant movement, and if movement was happening now, they were already behind. Rex surged forward, his nose working furiously, nails clicking lightly on the floor. Emily stirred in Mark's arms and whispered, "They take us that way," before pressing her face against his shoulder again. Her words confirmed his fear. He quickened his pace, moving with caution but urgency. The corridor bent sharply, and ahead loomed a metal door painted with a faded red exit sign. He set Emily down gently against the wall, signaled Rex to stay beside her, and approached the door. His hand gripped the handle, ready to lead them into the open air and toward rescue. But just as he turned it, a heavy crash reverberated through the frame. The door slammed inward from the outside with mechanical force, the locking bar snapping into place. The sound of a bolt sliding shut echoed like a verdict. Rex barked once, furious, lunging at the sealed barrier claws scraping metal. Mark pulled hard, but the handle refused to move the mechanism dead. He struck it with his shoulder, testing its give, but it held. Whoever controlled this place had anticipated pursuit, had designed exits not for escape, but for traps. He cursed under his breath silently, not with words, but with the hard grind of his teeth, then steadied his breath again. He could not let Emily hear despair. He crouched beside her, smoothing her hair back from her face, and whispered, "We'll find another way. They can't hide everything." She nodded, though her eyes betrayed terror she could not voice. Mark lifted his flashlight, scanning the walls, and noticed a vent grate set high above the floor. The mesh was rusted, but not sealed fully, the screws old and partially stripped. He motioned Rex closer, lifted Emily into his arms again, and moved beneath the grate. From behind the thin slats, air moved differently, fresher, and carried sound. He pressed his ear close, the cold metal chilling his skin, and that was when he heard it. At first faint, then undeniable, the low rumble of an engine turning over, followed by the squeal of tires on concrete. More than one vehicle. Through the vent came the echo of men's voices, sharp commands muffled by distance, then the slam of a heavy door. Emily froze against him, whispering so faintly it was almost a breath. "That's how they take the others." Mark's grip tightened, his jaw locked. He angled the flashlight beam through the grate, catching a sliver of light from outside. Shadows moved across it, briefly elongated forms. One of them, small, struggling, held by a larger frame. Then came the unmistakable sound of a van door sliding shut, followed by another. The engines revved higher, their vibration carrying through the concrete floor beneath them. Rex growled low, his body rigid with fury, as though he too understood that lives were being carried further from their reach with every second. Mark yanked at the grate, his fingers slipping against rust until one screw gave way. He pried harder, muscles straining until the metal bent outward enough for him to see clearer. 2 dark vans idled in the lot beyond, their paint-unmarked windows blackened. Figures moved with efficiency, not chaos, suggesting this was practiced routine. He saw one child lifted into the back, limp, perhaps sedated, while another whimpered faintly. Sound cut short as a door slammed. He shoved the flashlight into his vest, dug fingers under the grate again, forcing it wider. Rex leapt against the wall claws, scraping as if to rip the barrier down himself. But before Mark could clear the opening, the first engine roared louder. He caught the sharp flash of taillights as the vans pulled forward. The sound of gravel crunching under tires faded quickly, swallowed by distance. Silence rushed back, heavier than before. Mark pressed his forehead briefly against the cold wall, fury simmering beneath the discipline that had kept him alive all these years. He had one child safe, but others were slipping further into the dark. Emily looked up at him, eyes wide, searching for assurance. He steadied his breath, crouched low, and spoke firmly, not just to her but to himself. "They're not gone forever. We'll follow. We'll find them." He pulled the grate fully aside at last, revealing a crawl space narrow but passable. It did not lead directly outside, but the draft suggested another outlet somewhere deeper. He clipped the mini light tighter to Rex's vest, lifted Emily again, and guided the dog through first. The path was jagged dust thick, but it was movement forward, and forward was all they had left. As he crawled into the vent behind them, the weight of the van's departure settled on his shoulders, not as defeat, but as a command. He had glimpsed the network in motion. He now knew its shape, its efficiency, its cruelty. And with that knowledge came duty to chase, to expose, to tear it down piece by piece. The vent groaned under his weight, echoing like a promise in the hollow dark. Mark crawled through the vent with Emily pressed close against him, and Rex guiding point with silent precision, their bodies moving in rhythm with the groans of the metal. The vent spilled into another service corridor, this one even darker than the last, lit only by the thin beam of his flashlight. The draft was stronger here, and the faint scent of oil and exhaust still lingered in the air. Proof that the vans they had heard were not a dream, but recent reality. He steadied Emily on her feet and scanned both directions, noting the cracked tiles beneath them and the faint drip of water somewhere deeper down. The dog lifted his nose, ears pricked forward, body language sharp. Rex was not just alert. He was hunting. Mark adjusted his grip on his sidearm and moved forward. His steps, careful muscles coiled with anticipation. The corridor bent left, then stretched into a narrow hall lined with storage lockers. The beam of light caught the edge of something metallic on the floor. A dropped flashlight, modern, not coated in years of dust. Someone had been here moments ago. He felt the shift inside his chest, the sensation of being too late, yet not alone. He motioned Rex low, pressed a finger to his lips for Emily, and advanced with measured quiet. The attack came without warning. A shadow lunged from behind one of the lockers, a figure broad and fast arms swinging with brutal intent. Mark raised his weapon, but a gloved hand struck it cleanly, the pistol clattering against the tiles and skidding out of reach. The assailant slammed into him with full weight, driving his back against the wall, the impact knocking air from his lungs. He fought to raise his arms to resist the grip that pressed into his chest, but the man was strong, trained, deliberate. The stranger's other hand reached for his belt, searching for leverage, perhaps even for control of his remaining gear. Emily screamed, the sound sharp, cutting through the suffocating dark. That single cry triggered movement faster than thought. Rex launched from the floor, a streak of fur and muscle teeth finding purchase in the attacker's arm. The man roared in shock, jerking violently as the dog's jaws clamped with practiced precision. The pressure on Mark's chest loosened instantly. He dropped low, rolling aside, eyes locking onto where his weapon had skidded. His hand shot out, fingers grazing the grip, pulling it back to him, just as Rex yanked the assailant to the ground. The struggle unfolded in brutal clarity. Rex held on, teeth dug deep, body thrashing to unbalance the enemy. The man swung his free arm, striking hard against the dog's ribs, but Rex did not yield. Every growl from his chest was a vow, every shake of his head a declaration that this was his fight. Mark pushed to his knees, weapon steady, breath controlled. "Stay down," he ordered, his voice calm but edged with command. The attacker twisted, trying to reach his belt, perhaps for a blade, but Rex's weight forced him flat. Mark advanced his flashlight, catching the man's face briefly. It was masked features obscured, but the eyes were clear, cold, focused, unshaken, even under pressure. These were not random trespassers. This was organized, disciplined. He crouched, pressing the weapon firmly against the man's shoulder, close enough for the message to be undeniable. "It's over," he said, though he knew this was not the end. The man stilled briefly, then jerked, suddenly his free hand reaching for his belt again. Before he could draw, Rex snarled and clamped harder, forcing him to drop the attempt with a cry of pain. Emily clung to the wall, her eyes wide, frozen in terror, yet unable to look away. Mark glanced at her briefly, steadying his tone. "You're safe, Emily. He's not getting past us." He pulled a pair of cuffs from his belt with his free hand, snapping them over the man's wrist, then twisting to secure the other. Rex released his grip, only at Mark's command, teeth withdrawing, but body still pressed close, ready to strike again. Blood darkened the man's sleeve, dripping onto the tiles, a grim but controlled wound meant to subdue, not kill. Mark leaned closer, keeping his voice low. "Where are the others?" The man's silence was absolute. His breathing ragged, but his eyes unbroken, fixed on some unseen loyalty greater than pain. Mark recognized the resolve. This was not a hired thug, but a believer in whatever system had built these tunnels. He pressed harder, but silence remained. He pulled back, knowing more would be gained from the evidence than from this man's defiance. He bound the attacker's ankles, dragged him against the wall, and left Rex standing guard, the dog's growl a constant reminder of what resistance would cost. He retrieved his fallen weapon, checked the chamber, then steadied Emily again. "We keep moving," he told her gently. She nodded faintly, clinging to his arm. The fight had drained her further, but she kept her eyes on Rex with a flicker of trust. Mark swept the corridor ahead with his light. The lockers thinned into another passage, one that sloped upward toward faint outlines of reinforced doors. He caught the metallic tang of diesel, still lingering, proof the vans had departed minutes ago. Yet the encounter confirmed what he had feared: the operation was not just leaving behind traces, but leaving behind men to stop pursuit. They knew law enforcement had breached their shadows, and they were tightening the noose. He steadied his stance, guiding Emily forward. Rex walking proud at his side, ears alert, but body calm after the fight. The message was clear: they had survived the ambush, not by luck, but by instinct and partnership. And with that survival came clarity. The kidnappers were fleeing, but not beyond reach. The chase was no longer about evidence alone, it was about catching the living before they disappeared into the system's next shadow. Mark pressed forward with Emily steady against him, and Rex pacing at his side, the captured attacker bound behind them, his silence more telling than words. The corridor ahead opened into another chamber, its door heavier than the others, steel reinforced with a padlock that had been left unfastened in the rush of retreat. He pushed it open cautiously, his light sweeping the space. What lay beyond was not another holding area, nor a storage room of belongings. It was an office clean compared to the dust elsewhere, a command center hidden in plain sight. A long desk dominated the center, its surface cluttered with folders, maps, and a laptop still glowing faintly on reserve power. File cabinets lined one wall, each drawer labeled not with names but with numbers and letters, a code designed to conceal meaning from the uninitiated. Rex padded in first, nose close to the floor tail, stiff with concentration. Emily clung to the doorframe, her wide eyes scanning the unfamiliar order, whispering, "They brought people here, but they never let us see this room." Her words confirmed what Mark already suspected. This space was not meant for children, but for those orchestrating the movements of many. He sat her gently on a chair, adjusted the light, and began pulling open drawers. Inside folders, stacked with disturbing neatness, bore contracts and lease agreements. The names at the top were not individuals, but shell companies with sterile titles like Haven Properties LLC and North Star Community Services. Each document bore addresses of properties across different states, abandoned factories, closed schools, old theaters, all rented quietly under these facades. Mark's throat tightened as he scanned page after page. The pattern was clear. These buildings were not random. Each one had been chosen, deliberately rented under a corporate veil, and repurposed for the same purpose he had uncovered tonight. He spread the papers across the desk, snapping photos with his phone for record, his hand steady, though his chest burned with anger. Rex gave a low growl from the far corner, his nose pressing against a box tucked beneath the shelves. Mark pulled it out, opened it, and found rows of ID cards, some authentic, some forged. Each bore a child's face frozen in photos, likely taken for school, now tagged with numbers matching the codes in the folders. Emily's voice wavered as she pointed to one photo. "That's Chloe. She was with me. They took her away one night and she never came back." The sight of her small finger pressing against the glossy surface of another child's face anchored the truth deeper than any document could. This was not theory. These were lives, each detail confirming the scale of something far larger than a single town. Mark opened another folder, this one thicker, and inside lay a map of the United States with red pins dotting multiple states. Lines drawn between them connected sites like arteries of a body. On each pin was a handwritten note, dates, initials, numbers. He traced one line from Ohio to Pennsylvania, another from Oregon to Idaho. The realization struck with a clarity that chilled him. Every cluster of pins aligned with known missing children cases he had heard of, cases colleagues had struggled to close. The network spanned beyond his county, beyond his state. It was national. He pulled another file from the desk, one marked simply R allocations. The pages within listed groups of children described not by names but by characteristics: age, hair color, eye color, each entry ending with a status: placed, transferred, pending. It read less like records of human lives and more like inventory in a system designed for commerce. He felt his stomach twist but forced himself to keep scanning to gather every piece of evidence. This was what would break the silence, what would prove to the world that this was not rumor or isolated tragedy, but an organized industry of cruelty. Rex shifted suddenly, ears up tail. Rigid, his gaze fixed on the vent in the upper corner. Mark froze, listening. Faintly he heard the click of static, not random but rhythmic like a signal. Someone was transmitting nearby. He moved to the laptop on the desk, its battery low but screen still active. On it was an open email client, encrypted, half a message drafted but unsent. The text read, "Cascade compromised. Remove remaining units. Redirect to... The line cut off mid-sentence, likely interrupted when their presence was discovered. Mark snapped a photo of the screen, heart racing. Emily whispered again, her voice fragile but certain. They said there were other houses, other places. They said we were all part of something bigger. He knelt beside her, holding her gaze steady. You're right. But now we can show everyone the truth. They won't be able to hide this anymore. She nodded faintly, the trust in her eyes fragile but present. He gathered the most vital files, stacking them neatly, and secured them in his bag. He knew this room alone contained enough evidence to open investigations across multiple states to unite law enforcement in a way these perpetrators had never intended. Yet he also knew the cost. Whoever ran this would not abandon it quietly. They would destroy evidence, silence witnesses, vanish deeper into shadows. Mark clipped the bag shut, signaled Rex to heel, and lifted Emily again. He gave one last look at the red-pinned map, the vast spread of their reach, and felt the weight of what lay ahead press into his bones. The battle was no longer about one factory or one night. It was about dismantling an entire machine built to steal children and erase their voices. He whispered more to himself than anyone. This ends here, or it doesn't end at all. Mark secured the files inside his pack, lifted Emily once more, and motioned for Rex to guide them out. The office felt like the heart of a storm, evidence spread across its walls, but Mark knew they could not linger. He reached for the steel door they had entered through, only to feel a wave of heat seeping in from the corridor beyond. The faint smell of smoke reached his nose, sharp and bitter, rising faster with each breath. He opened the door an inch, and a wall of smoke rolled inside, curling like fingers across the floor. Fire was spreading through the tunnels not by accident, but by design. The criminals had triggered a purge, turning the building into its own grave. Mark closed the door quickly, shielding Emily from the smoke. He dropped to one knee beside her. We have to move now. Stay close. Rex barked once, sharp and urgent, then darted to a smaller door tucked behind a file cabinet. Mark pulled the cabinet aside, coughing as the smoke pressed harder against the sealed office. The door was narrow-locked by a rusted bar. He struck it with his shoulder, the bar groaning but holding. He struck again, harder, every muscle driving into the frame until the bar snapped free. The door flung open, and cool night air brushed his face like salvation. He pushed Emily through. First, then guided Rex out, the dog leaping into the night with grace. Mark followed last, the heat chasing him through flames, now licking the office walls behind. The instant he stepped into the alley, a dull roar echoed as the fire spread with frightening speed, orange light spilling from broken vents and windows, consuming years of hidden crime in minutes. He held Emily tight as she buried her face against him, her small body trembling not from heat, but from the realization that her prison was vanishing into ash. Emergency vehicles arrived at the front, red and blue lights strobing against the black sky. Paramedics rushed forward, taking Emily gently from his arms, wrapping her in a blanket, checking her vitals with practiced hands. More officers streamed in, securing the perimeter, shouting updates into radios. Mark handed over the evidence pack to a detective. He trusted his voice steady but firm. Get this secured. It's the truth they've been hiding. The detective nodded gravely, clutching it like gold. Mark bent down beside Rex, who panted heavily, his tongue lolling, soot clinging to his fur. He ran his hand down the dog's neck, murmuring, "You did it, partner. You got her out." Rex wagged his tail once but did not relax. His ears pricked suddenly, body stiffening, and he turned toward the tree line beyond the smoldering ruins. A low growl rose in his chest, then sharpened into barking, strong and insistent, directed at the darkness beyond the fire's glow. Mark followed his gaze. Through the smoke and branches, faint but undeniable, a pair of red taillights cut through the night. A vehicle moved away down a back road, slow at first, then accelerating until only the faint glow remained. Mark's chest clenched. He knew what it meant. The vans they had glimpsed before were not the only ones. Others had slipped away while the fire and chaos drew every eye. Those taillights carried lives, children still trapped in the grip of this network. He stood rooted, the roar of fire behind him, the wail of sirens filling the night, yet all he heard was Rex's relentless bark. The dog would not be distracted by medics officers or chaos. His instincts screamed the truth: the mission was unfinished. Mark exhaled hard, the weight of the night pressing heavy but clear. He crouched beside Rex, hand firm on the harness, and whispered so only the dog could hear, "We're not done. We'll follow. As long as they run, we chase." He straightened, his eyes narrowing on the retreating lights now swallowed by the forest. Around him, paramedics worked to stabilize, Emily officers documented evidence, firefighters battled flames. But Mark's mind had already leapt ahead, mapping roads, considering escape routes, calculating where those taillights might lead. He had files, now proof of the network leverage to rally resources beyond his town. Yet he knew none of that would matter if he did not keep moving, if he did not honor the vow forged in fire and smoke that no child would be abandoned. As dawn began to tint the horizon, the Carter building collapsed, inward sparks scattering into the sky like fleeting stars. Mark stood at the perimeter with Rex at his side, both of them coated in ash, both of them unbroken. Emily, wrapped safely in a medic's care, looked back at him once, her eyes meeting his. In that look was gratitude, fear, and the faintest seed of hope. He gave her a nod, a silent promise that her words would not be forgotten, that the others she spoke of would not be left behind. Rex barked once more toward the forest, his voice carrying across the dawn, not of fear but of pursuit. Mark placed a steady hand on his partner's back, eyes fixed on the horizon where shadows fled but never truly disappeared. The night had stolen much, but it had given him clarity. The fight was larger, the enemy faceless but real, and the chase was far from over. He whispered one last vow into the morning air. "We'll bring them home." That was tonight's story of Officer Mark Davis Rex and the hidden truth behind the abandoned factory. But what do you think? Was the fire meant to erase evidence or to send a warning? And do you believe Rex was barking at shadows or at the ones who slipped away into the night? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story powerful, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and join us next time as we uncover more stories where loyalty and courage change everything.